and I am the administrator at the Film Education Journal. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity today to talk to Pedro Alves and Ana Sofia Pereira. They are the authors of the article Short Film Production in Educational Contexts, a methodological proposal from the project Olhar pela Lente. This is an article which is going to be published in the next edition of the journal. And Pedro and Ana are here with us today to discuss the film education project that they worked on and wrote about. And we're hoping basically that this discussion that we're having and publishing on the Film Journal website will be a useful resource for readers, hopefully encourage you to read Pedro and Ana's article, but also give ideas and encouragement to teachers and educators who might be considering making short films with their own students. So Ana and Pedro, thank you so much for being with us today. And just to kick off, I wondered if you could introduce yourselves briefly and tell us a little bit about the project itself. Pedro, would you like to start?
Yeah, my name is Pedro. I'm a teacher at the Catholic University of Portugal in our School of Arts. I'm a film teacher. And one of the fields where I've been specializing in the last years in terms of giving training for teachers, doing activity with the youngsters, it's been film education projects. And so this got me to know some of the teachers who we worked with in this project. And I can talk a little bit of about the project, but I will first let Ana introduce herself as well.
So hello, my name is Ana. I am also a teacher of cinema and screenwriting. I taught in the Catholic University of Porto for a lot of years. That's where I met Pedro, actually. We were colleagues. And now I am teaching at an institute in Aveiro that is called ISCIA. And basically, my main focus in research has been film screenwriting, and particularly the presence of women screenwriters in film and cinema in Portugal and abroad. But here I was brought into this project by Pedro to test out this program in a school in Vila Verde that I'm sure he will now introduce in the best way possible.
One of the main activities I've been doing in terms of film education projects is participating in the National Film Plan, the Portuguese National Film Plan. That it's a governmental initiative that goes across schools all over the country, and also in the islands, Azores and Madeira. And they promote activities with youngsters in schools, so film exhibition activities and sometimes small workshops given by institutions or associations that exist and act locally. So they have like this sort of protocols and collaboration with them. But we also give teacher training, so giving teacher the tools, film literacy tools to analyze and speak with the students, discuss films and discuss film related contents. In this kind of training, I got to know, I don't know if it was in 2017 or so, 2016, two teachers from Vila Verde that came to receive their training. And a few months later, they contacted me because they wanted to develop a film education project in their school in Vila Verde, the secondary school of Vila Verde. So the secondary school of Vila Verde needed to prevent things like school abandonment, increase student motivation and engagement towards their school environment, to improve their engagement to the subjects, to the classes, to the teachers, to the between themselves, and they wanted to use artistic experiences to do so, not only film, but music, theater, painting, and others. So they wanted to do a project that brought film production into their schools. They were very eager to experiment film production with their students because they had been able already to do film exhibitions and to discuss films with their students, but never to do short film production with their students. So they asked us, me and Anna, to design this this project that across 16 weeks, how we could go into the secondary school and help them somehow to develop a project on short film production. They were able to manage to guarantee Europe 2020 funds that were very important to guarantee the material we needed to the short film production in order to motivate students that if they could have cameras, real cameras, not only just the mobile phone cameras, it would be a motivating factor for them. So they guaranteed cameras, tripods, microphones, everything we needed to semi-professional film production. And this was the first step to design this kind of program. So we were meant to work with students from non-artistic fields, so students that had never experimented art creation, film creation, any sort of art experience as the creators, not as the receivers. So the major challenge was how can we use short film production with youngsters that never used it, youngsters that didn't know how to produce a short film from beginning to the end, and through this process foster greater engagement and greater motivation in their presence and activities inside the schools. So this was the main challenge. We understood that this idea of short film creation, please interrupt me, flip whenever you want, okay? We understood that this idea of allowing students to engage in a process of narrative creation would be very important for them, as we understood that narrative allows this kind of process of building coherence and building significance, starting not from what others consider that they should do, but from their own interests, concerns, desires, fears, frustrations, etc. So the idea was to allow them to shoot a short film, but they were going to be the authors from the beginning to the end. They were going to decide everything about that short film production. And ourselves as tutors and also the teachers from the secondary school with whom we worked with, we were just going to be there to guide the process, to deliver some kind of important knowledge for them to master the tools and make their own decisions. But mostly in this way to give them the tools and not telling them how to use it. This obviously was inspired by other projects such as Moving Cinema from Creative Europe, Cinématien en de Jeunesse from the French Cinematheque, and also a Portuguese association, Os Filhos de Lumière, that I suppose you also know. They have a very interesting program, The First Look, O Primeiro Olhar, also with short film with youngsters through this whole process from script to editing. So these were some of the inspirations that guided us to design the program, and also the British Film Institute framework for film education and their three key dimensions, so creative, critical, and cultural. So we wanted them creatively to be expressing autonomously their individuality, from a critical standpoint to develop this reflexive ability on themselves and on their world, their context, and also to build this personal and collective identity through film. And this is the cultural dimension of the BFI. So this is a starting overview over what was the project and how it came to be designed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I love about your article is that it brings all these things into it. It's a really rich resource to unpick. But I suppose one of the things that I really love about it is I have a bit of experience of teaching myself, and I love the fact that in your article you have a very detailed timeline. And your article almost acts as a project diary, sort of going through the 16 weeks, week by week. I just wondered, could you tell us a little bit about how did you devise this timeline in particular, and was it a challenge to stick to this?
I think I can answer that now. So It was a little bit of a challenge, but the idea behind devising this kind of timeline was because we know that the challenge would be also to deal with students that had never worked with any type of idea of what film really was, of production of a film or anything of a kind. So the basic idea behind creating this kind of timeline was first of all to make sure that we had a balance between the theoretical and practical approaches. So the first 3 to 4 weeks were really to try and give the students the tools and the concepts that they needed to understand the process that was behind well, a filmmaking process, basically. So the 3 to 4 weeks was all about the theoretical and practical approaches that would help them actually understand how they could pick this up afterwards to actually create their own films. And then from then on, what we actually tried to do was to follow what would be the natural progression of the different phases of a film production. So from pre-production to production and post-production, so that they would actually understand, if they were making an actual professional film, how this would work, and each of the tasks and each of the roles that each of them could pick up from here. And also, me and Pedro were teaching different classes at the same time. So the fact that we had an actual, well, let's call it a script that we could both follow, and that we knew that in each of the session, and we had very little time with them. We had each of the weeks, we had 90 minutes with each of the class, which was very, very little. In the end, we had a total of 24 face-to-face contact with these students. So we knew that everything had to be on point if we really wanted them to do what we aimed that they did. So the fact that we had this script that we both could follow allowed us to make sure that all of the classes that were being taught, both by me and by him, were having more or less the same experiences. But obviously it was challenging. First of all, because sometimes the students had even fewer knowledge than what we expected them to have. So it took a little bit more time than we had expected for them to actually understand some of the concepts that we were trying to help them understand, and for them to understand the entire process of a film production. On the other hand, obviously some of the students were a little less engaged than we expected, so we had to figure out tools in the middle of all of this to help them engage with what was happening, and to, even when we were talking about theoretical concepts, to try and show them in a practical way so that they will still be interested and they will still be engaged with everything that we were talking about. And then we had other challenges that didn't really have a lot to do with us and with what we were talking and what we were doing, but mostly with the tools that we needed to actually film, the materials that we needed, the camera, the tripods, the computers for the editing, actually arrived a little late. So we had this whole plan of how all of this would work, and we had to adapt this plan constantly because of that, because, well, we were supposed to start shooting here, but the cameras aren't here yet. So how can we still follow this idea of a production process, but now we don't have any cameras? So how can we help them understand how this works? And the computers, for instance, for the editing didn't arrive in time. So me and Pedro had to devise a way in which, for them to still feel like they had control over the editing, but me and Pedro had to assume that role and had to do the editing ourselves with scripts, with editing scripts that the students devised themselves, so that they felt like they had the control of the film in the end. So the fact that we had this planned out from the beginning in a very, well, detailed way actually helped us a lot, even with these challenges, because every time we faced a challenge, we knew that maybe we could try it this way or that way, and the planning that we had done before helped us along the way as well.
Yeah, I like the fact that you emphasize the preparation is really as important, if not more important, than the actual result. It's this process of learning.
The preparation is key. Otherwise, because then when we're faced with challenges, we already prepared for that as well. Well, some of them take us a little bit by surprise, yes, but because we prepared for this, because we prepared for all of this that is happening, we are able to find the means to make it work. And it's interesting for the students as well, because in any film production process, there will be things that we weren't expecting, and there will be things that will catch us off guard. And for them, for the students, it's interesting to see as well how they can learn to adapt to the situations also, and to see, okay, so this didn't arrive in time, so this didn't work the way that we were planning, so now how can we devise ways to try and manage what is happening here.
Mhm. Another really interesting thing that you mentioned, and that I think will be very familiar to any teachers or people working with young people, is this the issue of motivation and student engagement. You mentioned the fact that there were challenges at times. I remember reading, you mentioned in week 3 during the script writing process, there were some students who just didn't want to get involved. How did you deal with less motivated students throughout the project?
Well, it wasn't always easy to do that, because I think that at first, most of the times what we felt was that students were actually afraid of us a little bit, because they didn't know what to expect, and they didn't know what this was going to be and what this experience was going to be, because it was all new to them, and it was new, a little bit new to their teachers as well. So we were all learning together how this could actually work. So for some of the students, it was a question of giving them time to start to trust us, and to start to trust this process, and to understand what we were all about and what we wanted to do with them. And for some of them, that was enough. For others, not so much. So for others, we actually had to adapt the type of discourse that we were having. We had to try to reach them in different ways, to approach them in different ways. Sometimes it was to try and get to them and try to understand, so what do you like to do? What do you don't like to do? So what kind of movies do you like? What kind of TV series do you watch? And then try to adapt our discourses and try to adapt our approach to the likes and dislikes of each of these students that felt a little bit less engaged, to see if we could bring them in and if we could reel them in into this project. And other times, because we were presenting them with such a variety of opportunities, of tasks and tools that they could use that they had never learned about or thought about before, it was a question of allowing them the time to actually understand what they felt most interested in, and what task or what role they could actually take upon in this filmmaking process, because they didn't understand what an editor did, or what a screenwriter did, or what a producer did, or what a director of photography did, and so on and so forth. So it was a question of actually helping them understand what each of these tasks meant, and what each of these roles meant, and allowing them the time and the space to figure out their own path, and to figure out their own role in this entire process that was entirely new to them. I think that it was challenging at times, yes, and I wouldn't say that all of the students all of the time were completely engaged. That wouldn't be true if I would say that. But I feel that most of the students at some point really connected with the project and with us, and allowed us to help them on this path, which was what we wanted, that they allowed us in as well, so that we could help them in the best way possible.
Mm. And thinking about that initial stage when you were getting to know the students, as you say, like developing their trust, were there any particular activities that you would recommend that worked really well, or any discussions or any films that you feel are really good to use with students?
Yeah, I think I can answer this one. In the theoretical and practical approach that Anna was talking about, it was always a key aspect to always bring students into discussing what we were looking at, or showing, or giving them knowledge about. So if we were talking about shot scale from the wide angle to the close-up, we, for example, did an exercise of shooting with mobile phones, different camera angles. So they were shooting each other, and this kind of experimenting with the tools we were giving them. And we had 90 minutes only with each class, and some classes had 40 students or more. So it was not easy to always be permanently looking into every student, if every student was understanding, motivated, participating. But these kind of small exercises that putting their hands on the tools that we were talking about and the knowledge we were trying to develop with them. I think it was a key aspect for motivating them and starting understanding what Anna was talking about. How is this going to be useful for me and my group to do a film of our own? So how are these tools going to be applied into shooting our own film? So this is an example of small exercises that we were trying to do, and also discussing everything. So it was not a matter of us exposing things and them assimilating them. We were always trying for them to participate as active and critical viewers of the things that we were showing. And this is how we were able to understand the kind of response we were getting from them, because there were students that immediately engaged in discussing things, and we understood that, okay, the bridge between us and them in terms of the trust that they have on us, it's already ongoing. Others were more reluctant to participate, and as any teachers deal with this, we just have to try new approaches and try to bring them in different ways. And some students, for example, were not keen into discussing orally what we were looking at, but in terms of making things and picking the phone and shooting something, they were the first ones to come. I had one student in one of my classes, for example, he didn't want to engage in any discussion, but he loved acting. And the role that he found in the short film production projects was as an actor, and he just wanted to act. So we allowed him to do just that. And this is the way he engaged with the project. So it's the kind of way we can personalize the kind of process, taking into account what the student thinks, feels, and the kind of experience you want to have.
And of
Yes,
course,
I think that, sorry, I think one of the exercises that we did that worked really well as well was the fact that we asked them to bring newspaper articles or stories from home so that they could start devising their own stories as well. And the fact that they were doing this so closely to home, so closely to the things that they love doing and to the things that they liked talking about, I think it really helped engage them as well, because they could tell their own stories and they could start thinking about the things that they really love to talk about. And I think that helped grow us closer together, and also that they helped them understand better some issues that they had to deal with as well. So the fact that they were bringing their own stories and that they were sharing their own stories, and sometimes telling them as stories from someone else or from other friends or family, that helped them engage a little more with the narratives and with the stories that they would tell in their films as well.
mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I like the part in your article where you do a little breakdown of the films and the themes that each one do. You see so much overlap between them, and I think it really shows how much the films they made were very personal to the students themselves. But of course, as well as being building relationships with the students, as external tutors, you were also building relationships with the teachers. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you worked with the teaching staff.
Well, I think in the end, the process was very fruitful for all of us. And as Pedro was saying in the beginning, he already knew two of the teachers that were working with us, which were Professor Aquiles and Professor Ana Paula, because they had done the training with the Portuguese Cinema National Plan with PNC. And so they had some knowledge and some ideas of what film was and film production was. And they actually worked as facilitators for us to get into the school and to know the other teachers. And they helped us get in all of this. And what was most interesting to see and to work with the teachers was that they were so eager and so keen to learn themselves. they wanted so much to be part of this process, and they were so excited that this new project was being done there, that was really interesting to see. And that not only allowed us as tutors to experiment with different things because the teachers were going along with us, but it also allowed students to see the eagerness that their teachers had to learn as well. And so it created this bubble that was really interesting, where everyone was there to learn. We were there to learn with the students as well, and to figure out new ways and interesting ways to engage with them, and to help them learn a little bit more about the film process in different ways. And we had to adapt each day to the students that we were engaging, that we were talking to. And at the same time, students could see that their teachers were really eager to learn as well. And at the same time, the teachers were really hungry for knowledge, let's say. So it created this interesting synergy between all of us, where all of us were really trying to learn. So I think that we the teachers, we worked really well together, because there was this willingness to learn from each other and to take the best that each other could give, which I thought was fruitful to the entire project.
Mm. And thinking about the role of the teacher, and this is something I relate to as a bit of a teacher. Your article emphasizes the importance of teachers not imposing themselves on the work of the students too much. And again, you mentioned that this was a challenge at times, for example, during the script writing process. And I'm curious, how do you find that balance between supporting students, but also giving them the creative freedom to express themselves in their own way?
As we are, me and Anna, experienced teachers in short film production, even in university contexts, we are more used to this urge you sometimes feel to solve the problems that you're seeing students are facing with. So we have that kind of experience, that a little voice that tells us you should not impose, you should let them find a solution in their own terms. But obviously, in this excitement and motivation that the Vila Verde teachers had, they often didn't know how to manage this urge to help students solve their problems. And obviously, they thought it would be the better for them, because the time constraints, the little face-to-face contact hours, these were all factors to incentivize you to help students solve their own problems. So, but we were able to manage this very well with teachers. This was something that in the beginning they had to raise some conscience about, to be aware of this need to let them suffer, not suffer, but let them find their problems, their struggles, deal with them, and find the solutions they can for it. And also trying to balance a little bit even the creativity that they could brought into the discussion with the students, to not impose this. It was something that came naturally because we had the classes with the students, but then we go have a 10-minute break to have coffee, and we were talking to the teachers what had been done and could be done. So we discussed very much with the teachers this kind of awareness that we should have on our role in terms of the process being done. And they immediately understood that in the end of the day, it's not about the result, it's about the process. So this was a key idea that they were very quickly were able to retain, and to know that in the end of the day, it's all about the students expressing what they think, what they feel, what they experience, finding autonomously possible solutions for the constraints they face, the problems they identify, and putting their creative ideas into the project, no matter what kind of judgment we make of them, how we feel about them. So this idea that we as tutors and teachers always on the sidelines, giving them a hand when they need, but letting them grow from themselves and build a project from themselves, was something that took a little bit of time in the beginning to discuss and to raise this awareness, but it was very easy. And just reinforcing what Anna said, we are very grateful to to the students of Vila Verde. This would not be possible without them. We hadn't the key role in this process. It was this team effort, us, the teachers, the students, we all created this kind of bubble, as Anna said, this kind of environment where we were all contributing to short film production happen between all these kind of agents, us, teachers, students, the school boards, the cafeteria lady that were serving us coffees just to keep us going. So everyone was a part, a little bit of this project. And I think it was one of the greatest feelings that we came out from this project, of this human relation, this kind of human discussion of what education can be, what we can be for each other, how can we help youngsters dealing with their reality, and they helping us to look into reality in new ways and finding new ways to work with them through that process.
What do you feel was the what did you learn from the students? Were there any surprises that you sort of took away and you thought, this is going to
Yeah, yeah. When you move into a project like this, and you know that you're going to have 160 students from non-artistic fields and don't know very much about film. But then, so you move into the process thinking, I'm going to teach them everything they need to know about film. But in that process, they're teaching you how you can teach them. So you are discovering yourself as a tutor or as a teacher when you want to do a project, and the film production project goes like this. It's a very personalized project. It's a very personalized process. So each student, each group has their own ideas, have their own plans for what they want to do. So they raise very particular questions, and they have very particular struggles and very particular issues, and that is always challenge you as a tutor and teacher. In at the same time, you are not imposing yourself to find a solution, but you have the obligation to work in the best way possible to give them some kind of tools that help them find that solution, tools that they don't have. So I think for us it was one of the major things. And then obviously you don't know. For me, for example, I don't know nowadays what is the concerns of a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old in a context like Vila Verde or other towns in peripheral regions outside the major urban centers. So you always have this kind of social, cultural awareness of what is happening and what's going through their minds and what's their concerns and how they deal with it. And you learn a lot about that, how you can deal with these specific and very particular questions that are happening everywhere. So they're not as specific and particular as you think, and you learn about that in the process as well.
Yes, and I think one of the things as well was one of the things that we always try to do as teachers, as tutors, as people who are working with film and with students, is to know, because we don't want to impose on their creativity, to know what the right questions to ask are. Because most of the times it's just that, to help students raise questions and to ask them, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that part of the story? Or have you thought about how you're going to figure this thing out? And with this particular students, it was for us, it was a learning process and learning curve to understand which of the right questions we had to ask them, which were the right questions to ask them as well, so that we could help them in the best way. And then, of course, what Pedro said, for us to actually understand what the issues and the topics that were really important for them were, which for us were new, because we don't have this contact with 15-year-olds and so on. So it was really interesting to see how these topics are not confined to Vila Verde, but are spread around Portugal, and I would say a little bit around the world, because then we saw that the teen TV series that are out there do have the same concerns that are being picked up as well, and they use those teen TV series as resources and as kind of examples of what they wanted to do as well. So it was interesting to see how they kind of matched, even when we're talking about a really, really small town in the north of Portugal, which is Vila Verde. And that was very interesting to see.
What, just out of interest, what were the main experiences that they were interested in or wanted to talk about or write about on film?
One thing that we found really interesting, if you ask a teenager to do a short film about anything that he or she wants, you can imagine all kinds of stories. And many of the films were about issues and situations related to the school environment. So it's one of the things that we found more interesting. They use the short film production also to think about how they relate to their colleagues, to the teachers, to the school environment, and bring some specific issues that they were concerned as, I don't know, friendship, violence, um, harassment, sometimes rape, for example.
Bullying as well.
Bullying, questions that are going through their minds, and they chose to approach them in a school context. So it was a way for them to rebuild through film production this kind of fiction image of how to deal with imaginary problems and imaginary situations that sometimes are very real for people they know or they heard about. But it was a way for them to relate with these problems and the school in this fictional and narrative construction of this reality. So it was interesting to see how they use this to deal with very real concerns and very present concerns. So I don't know if that answers a little bit what you were asking for.
No, absolutely.
I think what's interesting is that I had the opportunity after this Vila Verde project to teach in Macau as well, and to see what the concerns of Macanese people who are living there, or students who are more or less at the same age of the students that we had in Vila Verde, which were their concerns as well, which stories they decided to talk about. And the stories were very similar to the ones that we had in Vila Verde, and these are so far away from each other, but the stories were very similar. These concerns about school, about their experiences in school with friends, with bullying, with well, as Pedro said, rape and all of that. It was very similar what I found in Macau as well. Just the imagery that was chosen to portray those stories was different, because the examples that they have in each of the countries is very different, but the concerns of these students were very similar, which is interesting to see how they overlap around the world, basically.
Yeah, this shared universal experience. Yeah, absolutely. And for teachers who might be considering making films with their students, and these may also be teachers who have very little or no filmmaking experience, what would be your main tips for them if they were thinking of setting up a project?
Well, I think it's always fruitful if teachers have an initial knowledge about film literacy, about film language, knowing a little bit of the terms to talk and discuss films. This is something that working with students always helps, just to giving them these literacy tools and facilitating this kind of discussion. But for example, I think film production experiences can happen with modest technology. Today, you can work with mobile phones, cameras, for example, doing stop motion with simple objects. There are several free editing tools on the internet to edit your videos and to post-produce your videos. I think one of the major struggles, especially here in Portugal, is sometimes feeling the time to do so in not only in school hours, but outside school hours. Teachers are overwhelmed with obligations, and they have little time to do so. But also one thing that we must acknowledge in Portuguese teachers that I've known, they are very motivated to do it. So they don't have time, but they have such a strong motivation that they find the time in their own personal hours and with their own personal resources most of the times. And I think they do so because they recognize that this is a very interesting opportunity for students to engage with themselves, engage with their community, engage with their environment, and to express their concerns, their interests, their fears, things that they don't find an opportunity often in school, in the school curricula, in the school programs. And I talk about school because I think schools are a privileged environment for students to contact with arts and to contact, in this case, with film production, but also film exhibition. Many of the students don't have the possibilities to go to film theaters, don't have the possibilities to undergo artistic experiences and to contact with artistic exhibitions. So I think schools and teachers are, and Alain Galau was an author that emphasized this. Schools are natural places for these encounters between young people and film and the arts, because it's going to foster their cultural engagement, their active participation in thinking about reality, discussing reality, their own, others. So I think it's hard to find the conditions, but it's a very rewarding experience both for students, teachers, and school communities. And one of the major recommendations we can do is this idea that if you can give them conditions, students, to undergo through the whole process from script to editing, to autonomously undergo the whole process, it's great. And always have this preoccupation of not imposing yourself as teacher in the process, because in the end of the day, it's not about the result, it's about the process they undergo to build a project of their own and to express themselves in some kind of way.
To try to keep an open mind, because sometimes we know the students in a particular role and we think that they can do a specific thing, but to keep an open mind, because if this film process might show them other ways in which these students can actually succeed and can actually surprise them sometimes beyond what they were expecting. So to not bring preconceived ideas of what each of the students might bring to the table or not, because this will be a different process and the students might surprise you in what they can bring to the table, in what they can do as well. So to keep an open mind and to keep adapting and adjusting to the students that they have before them.
Fantastic. So definitely things I will keep in mind as well. Thank you so much for a really fascinating conversation. The article really is such a great resource for anyone who's interested in learning about making films with young people. So definitely urge viewers to read it. There'll be a link nearby this video as well. But yes, thank you both so much, Pedro and Anna, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For
Thank you.